Yeah, so like Philip, I do have a little bit of personal stuff on there, like I don't know, just not really though. I mean, it's really nice to be human, but at the same time, I really reserve my silliness for my personal stuff, and I really make my Twitter my professional face.
Great, thanks. Yeah, you were saying such good things, and I was like, oh, I forgot to hit record at the beginning of this, so that was my mistake there. Maren, you brought up a couple of really great points, and we will dive into the question about how to avoid maybe potential pitfalls of Twitter. But first, I wanted to ask about how to use Twitter to support that two-way communication, the building of the dialogue. You know, knowledge mobilization is really about trying to work with partners, understand their needs, understand how research can be applied. So it's not just a one-way source of information promoting research, but it's about trying to understand what the needs are and having that two-way communication. So are there tactics that, and maybe I'll start with Maren, and I'll work my way and see if anyone else has ideas to chime in as well. But how do you use Twitter to really engage farmers and decision makers and others in your research?
Okay, I don't know if I have an absolutely fabulous answer to this, because I think I kind of respond to more than I necessarily put out. That being said, if I have I think certainly asking a question or putting something out there, I think certainly using clever hashtags, figuring out what the hashtags are if you're, or a specific community if you are trying to reach those people. Plus people join lists sometimes. So there's certainly ways to focus things in, or if you come across something, you can quote tweet it and then put something out. But I think you kind of, if you want to engage in conversation, like if you're looking for feedback and engaging in two-way conversation, I think you have to let people know that. And so I will, in those cases, let them know that I'm looking for responses. And, you know, there's been really, it's amazing how receptive people are to two-way conversation. I remember, you know, I've been in the past looking for field sites within a certain distance of Waterloo, and you just put that out there on Twitter and people are very, very fast to get involved, or has anybody had an experience with such and such a thing? And people are really great to reply to those things. But I wouldn't say I'm a pro at it by any stretch. I fumble my way through it. I think there's a few other people here that are much better at it than me.
Thanks, Maren. Yeah, that resonates with me, that you don't always have to create your own platform for communication, but you can join other conversations as well. Phil or Sherry, did you want to weigh in on that question? Do you have any other tips or tactics that you use to support two-way communication and dialogue on Twitter?
Yeah, I guess I see knowledge mobilization as very broad and includes other scientists, just kind of to make that point. But I look at who is following me. I know that sounds weird. It's not that I want to creep on people. I want to know what their kind of fields are. And so I see that I have a number of followers that are in the in policy and also in communication fields, some very, very popular authors who are communicating in my subject area. And then, you know, things like CBC and news anchors, right? So I find that creates connections. I certainly speak offline, well, not offline, but off Twitter with people who are promoting science and doing science communication in other forum than I would normally use. And I think Twitter has made it easy because they'll follow up with questions they have on certain things that we're posting, new research we're posting. So, you know, people who are news anchors are always looking for stories and leads, and they do search Twitter to do that. So I would add that to what Maren has talked about, and everything else I would absolutely support that she said.
I guess the one thing that from my experience, Two-way communication, like yes, you want to have two-way communications, but it's not something that you can define what it happens. So, you may put some content out and you think, oh, this is really good, and people are really gonna really engage with this, and you get nothing. And then there's other random stuff you post, and all of a sudden, this is what really people want to talk about. So it's the thing with, say, Twitter is you don't control it, and you can get into either nothing or into weird places. And so it's always a bit of a, I don't know, it keeps things interesting. But then also a lot of the two-way communication, it happens through, direct messaging and all that kind of stuff that you don't see. And there's huge value in that. Yeah, I was going to say something else, but I forgot. So.
No worries, you can jump in if you think about that. My next question was around specific aspects of Twitter or features of Twitter that make it particularly helpful for researchers and academics. Are there, Maren mentioned hashtags, clever hashtags. Are there other ways that you, other aspects of the program that you have found to be really helpful? Maybe I'll start with Phil.
I don't use a lot of other social media at all, so this is just the one I use. So is there anything specific about Twitter? I don't know. But it's the one I use. The aspect that I've often used is if I want to go down a rabbit hole on something, I'll do a thread. And then it's sort of like you can go as far as you want, but the whole key of that one, to do that one well, is your initial post has to be engaging. So if you write a thread, you can put all sorts of garbage in at the end, but the first one has to be connecting with your audience. And so, yeah, it can be a bit of a challenge sometimes to get that one right.
Mm-hmm. Carl, I see your hands up. I'll let you ask a question in just a moment. Maybe I'll see if Maren or Sherry want to chime in on my question first around specific features or aspects of Twitter that you found particularly helpful.
Sherry, do you want to go ahead? No? Okay. Okay, so for Twitter, it's the epitome of TLDR, like too long, didn't read. Like it's one line, right? So you're not burdening people with a big commitment. I find people are really, really busy, and you get inundated with emails on and they just come at random times. When I want to surf Twitter, I have sort of specific times that I go on Twitter. It might be while I'm maybe I'm waiting to pick up a kid or something, and so I have a few minutes to surf or something like that, or whatever. I have certain sort of my habits of certain times a day maybe. But I like it because it's a sentence, and I mean, often there's a link to something else. So if I'm interested, then I can dive in deeper if I want, if there's a thread. But at the same time, it's not a big commitment to read, and you can get a lot of information in a rapid fire in a very short period of time. And if you're not interested or whatever, it's just you don't like what's going on, keep scrolling or log off Twitter. So I really like that element of things. I think people are just, I do think other people like it if you can get that information out. So I would echo what Philip said about sort of if you're going to have a thread or even just your tweets, try to make them engaging and informative. I think those are really helpful things because that might be the only thing that people read. And I think if you are trying to reach out to people and get a quick answer, well, sometimes you might send an email to colleagues, I'm searching for such and such a thing, and then you get crickets. Whereas if you put it out on Twitter and somebody has an answer, they might answer it. Or the other is just even, it may be people that don't follow you or you don't follow, but they see somebody else's response and they weigh in, and inevitably you end up following each other back, and it just builds your community even further. So I really do like that. I also, I have a hard time staying on top of the literature. Yes, I'm admitting that publicly. It's just hard to, I don't have days where I just read what's new. Twitter's a really great place. You just see that come through, and then I will sort of my inbox is filled with me forwarding tweets to myself of papers I want to check out, or I send them to my students or my colleagues, like, wow, check out this great paper. So I really find that those elements of things, also just sometimes you need help with something, like it might be an R question or a data analysis, or has anybody ever had this issue before? And you will typically, I find you're going to get the fastest answer on Twitter. And I like that.
Yeah, I also use questions, for engagement of the public, right? So they might not be questions that I need answered, but they're questions to stimulate discussion. And I've seen lots of other people who are really good at this doing that a lot. I think storytelling is very interesting. I've noticed some of my colleagues are actually getting some training in storytelling to better communicate the science. Hashtags, well, everything that's been said already. I also think carefully about what pictures and videos I put up. Those are, when you're scrolling, if you're a scroller type person, which I'm not particularly, but most people are, I think, and that will catch their eye. Is great video, pretty pictures, clips that aren't too long. I try to make every video I have up less than 10 seconds. And then I think the last thing we haven't talked about related to this is timing. If you're putting up some content that you want to be, Twitter disappears quickly, right? So you have to hit the peak times of traffic if you have something that you want other people to see, because you could have the most fabulous post ever, and it matters what time of the day you put it up and what time zone that you're in, where the bulk of the people are in the world that you want to view this stuff. So, if I want a whole bunch of people in Ontario to look at it, I'm gonna think about what time zone is Marin in, when is she most likely to be on Twitter, and there's a whole set of analytics for looking at that, which I don't really get into, but I do know some graduate students who are very good at analyzing that kind of data. And that's where you can use your social media team at a university to help you identify those peak traffic times where your work is more likely to be seen.
I've also seen people tag people in things. So I agree with you completely about timing, but then also tagging specific people if they're trying to make sure those people see it.
Great tips. And I would invite our attendees to also add your thoughts to the chat box. So if you have found specific success in any features on Twitter that you'd like to let us know about, feel free to add that to the chat box. Likewise, any other answers to these questions that I'm asking of our panelists. And if anyone has questions, feel free to either raise your hand or add those to the chat box, and I'll make sure that I ask the panelists. So Carl, you did have your hand up a few minutes ago. Did you want to unmute yourself?
I was just,
ask the question?
Just wanted to ask, there was a lot of application to field work and being out in the field. I was just wondering if there's any experience with modeling. Have modelers been using it at the same extent as field work scientists?
I can answer that. The answer is yes. The modeling community is extremely active, and this is where there's a lot of communication of how to, there's displaying model results, there's incredible 3D models on Twitter, and breaking news kind of ways of how to accomplish or solve some problem with modeling. There's quite a lot of modeling, and GWF is active in modeling. The integrated modeling group is very active.
Thanks.
The challenge is sometimes field work is much easier to get engagement on because it's much easier to get pretty pictures versus doing a very extensive modeling exercise and getting a good visualization, because you need to be able to communicate it in whatever your 244 288 characters, right? So what makes sense to a modeler may not make sense to anyone else. So it's very much that whole exercise of is distilling it down, which is a bit harder on the modeling world, but not, it's still useful, clearly.
I think graphical abstracts and data visualizations can be incredibly powerful. And I've seen some absolutely beautiful ones that have come out of the modeling community as well that can draw you in.
Is this also a question of audience? So are you, is it easier maybe to find your or identify your audience for field work than it might be if you're a modeler? I assume there's different audiences. So modelers probably want to talk to other modelers to get tips and ideas and maybe promote collaboration. Is it harder to think about who might be using the results of models and trying to figure out how to connect with them? I'm not sure. Sherry or Maren, you're both unmuted. Were you going to jump in?
Go ahead, Sherry.
But I think it's important, whatever work that you're doing or scholarly work you're doing, and so you already know who your audience is. It's figuring out the best way to connect with that audience on Twitter. So, you know, if you're doing modeling work on flood, you might want to connect with people who are casters in practice, or you might want to connect with public. I mean, I think there's quite a bit of opportunity.
Great. Yeah. And there's a couple questions coming in through the chat, so I'll get to one of them. Jane Elliott's asking, can you explain a little bit more about using hashtags? So maybe dive a little bit further in how do you find the right hashtags to use? Are there specific tips or tricks for picking certain hashtags?
Okay, so I find certainly I don't generate my own hashtags necessarily. I find that, I mean, a lot of it is just observation. Once you start to engage in those specific communities, you start to realize that there are certain hashtags that everybody is using that unite them towards a community. So for example, ONTAG, which is Ontario agriculture, or water quality, or there might be a hashtag for a given meeting or a conference or something. And so the first thing that I think I do is I look out there and see if there's an existing hashtag on something. And then I start to kind of become familiar with the ones that are associated with those key communities or groups. If, on the other hand, I'm just trying to reach a lot of people and disseminate that information, then I will just have topical hashtags, like not necessarily specific communities, but it might be phosphorus, water quality, tile drainage, agriculture. Like I might just have a whole bunch of those things. That's kind of been my approach to hashtags anyway. And oftentimes when you do start to do a hashtag, things will pop up and you'll be able to see from that list that, oh yeah, somebody's already got one of these. And it's amazing how if you just get one thing wrong on the hashtag, that you miss out on everything, because there's actually, like, for example, for a given meeting or something, that the official hashtag is different than what you thought it was. So sometimes if there's more than one, it's worth the investment of just an extra 2 minutes to make sure that you're on the right one.
Yeah, and hashtags are different between social media platforms. They don't all mean the same thing. So just checking that out if you're using different forms of Twitter. You know, I have created, so the jam cam is one, or using trail cameras and eco-hydrological research, and as you can imagine, Beaver Twitter creates a lot of interesting emails that I get. So, you know, sparingly creating hashtags, using them effectively, deciding how, I find it terribly annoying to try to read, you know, a sentence that is completely filled with hashtags. I won't even read that tweet, I'll just pass it by. So using them sparingly and effectively, and not just tagging other people, but tagging the organizations. Like, you know, you have a new publication coming out and it's GWF funded, then, you know, tag GWF pubs, right? Like something like that, so you can gain maximum exposure.
Anything else to add on that one, Phil?
Hashtags are important and good, and they help like formalize stuff, but the algorithm is still looking at your content hashtag or not, and still is putting those things in relevant fields of people that might be interested in it. So there's like, we're kind of playing with a partial deck of cards when we're doing Twitter, because there's this whole algorithm behind the scenes that we don't really understand, and it creates obviously connections for us, but it changes over time. So there's a while where certain things really had much more of an impact. I didn't change anything, but then the impact decreased. And so there's other stuff going on there that is really outside of your control at the same time. So just because you have content that works sometimes doesn't mean it works all the time.
Great, that's really helpful to know. We have another question come into the chat. I'm wondering about the separation between personal and professional accounts. Do you have two different accounts? Do you post similar content on both? Or maybe you have multiple accounts for different research projects. How do you set that up, and how do you manage the differences between different accounts?
I don't want to jump in before others get a chance. Philip, Sherry, do you guys want to? Okay. So for example, I have my own Twitter. So again, like I said, I reserve Twitter for professionals. So when I say I have a personal account, I have my Marin M Twitter account. But again, it is professional. It's not for, you know, what my kids ate for supper kind of thing. And on the other hand, we also have the Agricultural Water Futures account that I also manage. And you'll notice that there's definitely far less on my AWF account than there is on my Marin one, partly just because of time. I just don't have time to. I'm amazed at the amount of time some people are able to put into Twitter every day, and I'm just not at that point in my life where I can. But so part of it is time, but part of it is, so how do you manage them, and is it the same content? I would say there is definitely crossover, and so if you know, not everything that I do or that I'm interested in and engaging with on Twitter belongs on Agricultural Water Futures, vice versa. Not everything that is I am not the only person who is on is tweeting about Agricultural Water Futures. And so what I do is, if, for example, let's say I follow Philip and Philip posts something AWF related, and I really think it's cool because I always do. And so I will often retweet it or like it from my personal account. But the first thing I'll do is hop over to AWF. And that's the joy of the iPhone. It allows you to do that. Just hop over and retweet it. But likewise on Agricultural Water Futures, I might see really neat global water futures things that I can retweet or whatever, but don't necessarily relate to my own work and my own community that necessarily follows me. So sometimes I'll retweet it, but most of the time I'll reserve it for Agricultural Water Futures. So yeah, there is crossover where it sort of has dual citizenship. I will make a conscious effort to go between the accounts and give it visibility in both. But on the other hand, I don't just automatically post the same content to both, because they are very much different communities, and I try to draw boundaries.
Phil or Sherry, do you want to weigh in on that? Sherry?
Yeah, so I have the one under my name, right? that's my personal professional brand. I don't have a whole bunch of other ones. I am the lead on a Create grant, shutting down, and we had a Twitter account. It was being run by a program manager that I had hired, but kind of predated this idea of having a strategy. You know, had no idea what we were doing. I would say it was a massive fail, to be quite honest. I know there's followers, but there's no content. None like generated by us. I know Mountain Water Futures has a Twitter account. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that or not. Sorry to pitch that. But you know, that I'm not exactly sure who runs that, but I do tag them when I'm talking about research from an area, and that account will retweet research findings out of the project, but I don't manage. The only other thing that's not Twitter, and it's soon to be released, is that I'm experimenting with TikTok. And I saw that there was about other forums. I am leading a grant that is trying to figure out how to promote undergraduate and graduate programming in hydrology. And we have decided on Twitter because of the age of the audience trying to reach. And, you know, I have no idea this, so I know how to hire someone awesome. That will be launching, I believe, this week, actually. For kind of content, purposeful strategy, engaging people.
Great. Phil, do you have multiple accounts that you have to manage?
No, I keep it simple. I just have my one. I will tag associated project accounts, but I don't run any others. It all takes time, and I actually have to do actual research too.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've also been part of project teams that have discussed how to manage a Twitter account for a project when individual researchers have their own Twitter accounts as well. You know, one idea is to assign members of your research team a week or two at a time to tweet from the project account. So sharing some of that onus. But I think it's also worth thinking about some of the issues down the line. If you're building a big followership under a specific Twitter account on a project, what happens when that project ends, and how do you continue those conversations even after the funding might be done? So I think there's some interesting things to think about there. I might move on to one other question I have before I get back to the questions from the chat box. I'm wondering about specific pitfalls, or maybe some of the downside of Twitter. Have you had any of those sort of maybe more negative experiences? How do you manage that? How do you avoid some of that?
I have had a bunch of negative things. I can share that. You know, you can't work on beaver dams without receiving a whole lot of really interesting, very sexual related responses. I ignore them all. I also, my most popular post, not beaver, it was a moose. It was a moose jumping. It had 20 million hits. And I found out that my image was stolen and reposted as someone else's, like they claimed it to be their own, in multiple forums online. And a colleague who connected with me on Twitter let me know I had to take further actions. I think, you know, Twitter, you have to think about what your objectives are with it and what you're comfortable with in terms of how you want to engage. You can engage any way you want. And lots of people use it to express a lot of very personal opinions. A lot of people use it to express their anger about any number of things. And, you know, you can choose to engage or not engage as you see fit. I don't personally engage in those things. I don't have the emotional bandwidth to do that, nor if I have any interest in arguing with people online. going on in my own world to not engage in that way, but lots of people do engage in that way, and so you have to have a plan for dealing with it and whether you want to engage in something, because you can easily be enraged by something you read on Twitter. And you know, our automatic response, our flinch response, is to respond to that. And you know, you just have to decide for yourself how you want to engage online, and create some rules for yourself so that it doesn't kind of take over. This is, from a professional standpoint, for me, it's a part of my knowledge mobilization plan. It's not my entire one. The currency in academia is still producing papers and books and other scholarly items. And you have to be cognizant of that. Maybe I talked too long.
No, thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in on avoiding some of the pitfalls? Marion, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So like I said earlier, I definitely keep my work and my personal life separate in terms of Twitter. I mean, like I said, there are some personal things that I do put on it, but it might, I think it shows that you're a human, and you know, you can also, yeah, it might make things a little bit more approachable, but it also, again, my motives for using Twitter, some of it is promoting research and talking about your research with others, but some of it is also shared experiences with other people. And again, maybe it's women in science with kids or with whatever. And so by sharing very real experiences, it builds that community and can lift people up. So I don't want to keep it such that I don't do anything that's not related to my research world. So I definitely do things outside of that. But that being said, I still have rules about what is and is not sort of appropriate. And so a lot of us have our Twitter feeds, whether or not, you know, you can have a disclaimer, oh, tweets do not represent my organization. But, you know, you very much do represent your organization, and whether or not you like it or not. And if you don't want to be associated with your organization at all, then you probably want to be anonymous, right? Because you are associated whether you like it or not. And a lot of people have their Twitter feeds going directly to their web page or their departmental web page. And so if you have a lot of silly personal stuff that's going up on the University of Waterloo geography web page, it's sort of, it's not ideal, right? So you don't, and you certainly don't want to use vulgar language or put, you know, even if you are angry, you don't want to do that, because it is still a reflection of you professionally, and unless, you know, I mean, that's just my personal opinion. So I definitely manage things that way. I'm very careful that way. I also do not engage in controversy outside of my direct area of expertise. In fact, I don't really engage in controversy, period. Like, I will definitely engage in conversations that are going on, but I don't like to be polarizing, so I tend to be rather diplomatic. But you know, so for example, if you have farmers having a disagreement about specific practices, I might, you know, be diplomatic and offer a professional opinion or something, but I try to be sensitive because people may have real reasons for why they do what they do. But I don't necessarily engage in things that are outside of my research expertise, like a lot of controversial stuff or pylons or anything. And people do use it very much as a platform at times, and they'll put people on blast, and I'm just I'm just not a fan of that, and I don't want to invite it, and I don't want to contribute to it, because so I would, you know, I know that sometimes we have a responsibility to lead, but sometimes people can want to be edgy or can react just because they fire something off on their phone, and sometimes that can just cause a lot of explosions that you maybe didn't intend it to come out the way that it did, but it can either be really damaging to a particular person, and people do make mistakes, or it can be damaging to you later on. So I do find I draw that line, and I don't engage in that way. But I know there are others who don't share my viewpoint, but that's just me.
That's helpful. Phil, any other thoughts on handling maybe the negative aspects of Twitter?
I think you just need a clear strategy when you start off. It depends on your audience. So my audience tends to be more agricultural, producer level. And so I need to engage to the level that I have, I don't know, established a little bit of credibility, that people know who I am. And you do that through engaging with people, but yeah, avoid the controversies, because there's lots. And I've never been really burnt by it too much. But like, you never know how you put something out with under 288 characters and it makes sense in your mind and you're not doing anything controversial, but someone can read it completely different. So you have to be very careful of how, if you're going to do something, be very careful if you're engaging something, to really clarify, unless you really want to get into the controversies, but that's not me. So
Very helpful. We have a question that came in. How long do you usually spend on Twitter posting and viewing? So I see that Sherry's answered. She says about 15, 20 minutes a day. Phil, how long do you usually spend?
I'll check intermittently, say 15 to 20 minutes. If I'm going to do a post, there's a fair bit of crafting that goes into that to be able to get a message into the format in a way that is engaging. So those can take, sometimes hours to put together, because you want to put in content and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, those are for specific threads.
Man, what about you?
I had typed something. Yeah. So I just answered. I just said that it depends on the day, what I'm doing, maybe what I'm interested in posting or I'm reading about it. Like some days, if I'm really busy, I'm not on Twitter at all. And then maybe just as a matter of habit, I might just, flip on Twitter on my phone and just do a quick scroll just to see if anything shocking is happening in the world. But aside from that, I just, don't have time. On the other hand, if I am trying to start a conversation about something or showcase something or start a thread, especially if it relates to a research finding, I would say careful planning about how you're presenting your stuff. So that can be a little bit more time consuming. I mean, it's not going to take you a lot of time, but it's definitely going to take you more than 30 seconds, So there are some days, and again, it's like, I might check in throughout the day, like Philip said, or if there's something in particular going on that I'm following or I'm really engaged in, then there can be days where I'm on a lot longer, but I would not say that I put a massive amount of time into it each day.
I think good content takes time to develop. I don't use push notifications at all. So nothing like if somebody's responding, I don't use push notifications for any kind of social media or my email or anything like that. I don't want my cell phone polluted that way. But I know lots of people do. They might respond instantaneously, and you have to be careful a little bit. People expect immediate responses to things, and so you might have to explain yourself once in a while that you don't use push notifications, or if that's your choice.
Great, thanks. So we have just a couple minutes left. I thought maybe I would give each of you an opportunity to say any closing thoughts. Maybe you have one or two tips you want people to remember from this session. Maybe if somebody's new to Twitter, where might they start? So any sort of just last few words. Maybe I will start with Sherry.
I would say, just be mindful of why you want to engage in the forum. We're all very, very busy. We have lots going on in our lives. And so what do you want? And then perhaps looking at some of the literature that relates to your why and understanding what it is you want to do. I think a lot of people, when they start on Twitter, are kind of just watching for a while before they start really engaging, and that's okay too. Have fun with it.
That's a great note to end on. Phil, do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
To do any social media well, you have to invest time figuring out your voice, your strategy, what you want to say, and all that kind of stuff. So there is a bit of effort that goes into it. But there are opportunities that come through. So I'm in earlier career stage with a pandemic where we were stuck at home and we're not going to conferences. Twitter is actually really good for developing network that I never had before. It's a different network. It's not just academics. And so there are tremendous opportunities that have fed back into my actual work. And so there is, yeah, it's worth to do, but be prepared that if you're going to do it, that it will take effort.
Yes, that's good to remember. And Maren.
Yeah, I think recognizing that social media and Twitter, although, you know, it's nice if you can do it, but sorry, what am I saying? I think recognizing whether it's for you or not for you is perfectly okay. There are people who have Twitter and people who really like it and really use it and are really active on it. And if it doesn't naturally come to you, it doesn't mean that you're going to be necessarily great at it at the very beginning, but it's something that you could learn if it's something that you invest in and you know, bit by bit, just use it for you. But if at the same time it is something that you just, it isn't you, it's okay. And it's still okay to even just have an account just to see what people, you know, like you can use it however you want. And that's I guess what I'm trying to say. You can use it as much or as little. If you're like, no, I don't want it, then don't do it. On the other hand, if you're like, well, I'm just gonna have no posts or retweet the odd thing, but I just sort of stay on top of things and like things, that's okay too. But it's a process. And I think, you know, the other thing is it's not like you start off and then all of a sudden it becomes this beast that runs away and now you have to all of a sudden engage every day and keep your content up. I don't think that's true. I would say there were times I was way more active. I would say in the last couple of years, I've actually been far less active. I think it's going to ebb and flow. And I think just letting it go that way organically and not pressuring yourself is a good idea, because you're not going to, if it's a stress, don't ever let it stress you out to try to manage content. Like I just don't think that's a good idea.
Great. I think that's really helpful advice. Thank you so much, Maren, Phil, Sherry. Your comments are very insightful. They resonate with me. I think it makes a lot of sense. Thank you to Monica for opening up this session with a great presentation. We will be sharing those slides with all of the registrants. And thank you to our participants for joining us. It was a really great session. So thank you again and have a great rest of the day.